Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Kalinga Literature Festival. With us today, we have Arunava Sinha, whom everybody knows, books editor at Scroll and translator of Bengali literature to English, and now also the other way around very recently. And Sinha has translated over 60 books from Bengali to English, several of which have won or been shortlisted for Indian and international awards. And we are here to discuss his latest, Khwabnama by Akhtaruzaman Elias, which has been described by many as no less than an epic, and I would agree. So let's get into it. Welcome, Arunava.
Thank you, Ritu.
So, I so many people like me who don't read a language that has such a huge, rich legacy of literature, and where do you even begin? How do you pick a book that is worthy of translation?
Well, there are some basic conditions, of course. It has to be a book that I love, and it has to talk to me in a way that very few other books do. I can't quite put my finger on what parameter it is that makes this possible, but you just know it. And I've now reached a stage where I don't even need to read an entire book. I sometimes come to a decision within the first few pages when I know that something magical is happening in this book, and I would read it. It's like, Ritu, it's a lot like when you hear a song and you love it so much that you start humming it or singing it yourself. So that is the closest metaphor I can think of, because the motivation is very similar. You're not even thinking of anything big like, translating it so others can read it, or translating it for it to be published. Nothing like that. You're just taken up by the need to sing that song, right? And it's the same thing. You're taken up by the need to write this book again, except in a different language. So that's how it works to begin with.
Right. So I was curious on that question. Do you actually finish reading the entire thing, or do you translate as you go along uh, after the first?
Well, increasingly, I'm trying not to read too much of the book, ideally, very little of it before I start translating. And at one point, this would have seemed completely audacious and
Mhm.
outrageous. But then I happened to read that this is exactly what Gregory Rabassa did with 100 Years of Solitude. He did
Ah,
not read that book before he translated it. So he was reading as he went along. And then a number of my translator friends around the world, for example, Daniel Hahn, they follow the same strategy. And Daniel put it very well. He said, I read as I translate, and I translate very fast because I want to know what's going to happen next in the book.
I was just going to say, so you have that, that romanticism alive. So,
Yeah.
and that, in fact, that was one of my latter questions on how it is when we write, the business of translating versus when you're a novelist or a memoirist, you don't know. And I want to find out. And I remember when I used to struggle with that, because
Yeah.
both you and I have a background in journalism,
Yes.
and we struggle with faith. I think we're just born cynics and skeptics. And I remember Neil Gaiman saying that you have to have faith, you have to love your characters, because if you don't, who will? And it seems like it's very similar to what you are doing as a translator, which I have to say has been very enlightening for me and kind of blew my mind a bit, because I thought that it's a little bit like an editor, picking a manuscript, and what you mentioned, that you read the first three chapters or whatever, and it's like a gamble you take. Uh, so that's interesting that you're kind of doing both. That you're also discovering as you go.
Yeah, it's a little harder here than in the West, because in the West, what happens is that publishers usually commission translations. So
Mhm.
translators don't make the pitch. They don't have to personally be convinced that the book is good enough to be translated. Of course, they have relationships with certain authors, so they know that, okay, this author's book is bound to be good or of a certain standard. But here we don't have that luxury, because we are often the ones who do the pitching. We are the ones who go up to the publisher and say this book is worth doing. And imagine now going to a publisher and saying, guess what, this is a 500-page book, I've read 30 pages, I think we should translate it and publish it. And the publisher is like, oh, yeah, come back in a couple of years.
Yeah,
So
and also, I don't think we can compare, because we have so many languages, we have so many nations into one, and each one so rich, so variegated. Each one, I would say, a country in its own right, versus say, I don't know, Italian or something.
yeah, I mean, we're like Europe. so many languages, and each with
Yeah.
its own
Probably even more diverse, I would say,
even more diverse. Yeah.
than your
That's
and
right.
that ancient legacy. And and I'll always be grateful to you for introducing me to Alessandro Baricio, who landed up becoming one of my favorite writer. That you would give to me Ocean Sea.
Mm.
It just, I don't know, that there's so much novelty versus say Elena Ferrante, which is very much, I don't know, very much like the modern world. So the aesthetic is very
Yeah,
similar. It
yeah,
doesn't move me at all. I don't care how hyped she is. So the the whole business of translation versus book, because we as readers and writers who read in a very different way, or anyone who wants to write would consume books in a very different way than just for entertainment. So it is very interesting how time plays a role. And I wanted to now, I mean, just come back to this, like, how, when did you decide this was it? Because it's no less than the Iliad or the Odyssey. I don't know, it just goes on and on. And
yeah,
I mean, I don't even know what my feelings are about this book, because, like I said, I lost my appetite reading it, and
yeah.
it's it leaves you breathless. It's so overwhelming, and I will have to reread it a couple of times, which we don't see that often anymore with books. So how did you decide to translate it? How long did it take, and were you as overwhelmed as well? Because I've read your other translation; they're very different.
Yeah, Khwabnama was a different experience in the sense that I had read the book. I mean, I read the book even before I was translating. As soon as I started looking at books from Bangladesh.
Mhm.
The first book that everyone mentioned over there, and I'm talking about the early 2000s, was Khwabnama.
Yes,
So
of
I
course.
picked up a copy and read it, and I was completely blown, obviously.
Yeah.
I couldn't stop reading it for one thing. And for another, it was a very strange situation because on the one hand, I couldn't stop reading it. On the other hand, I had to stop reading it every few pages or paragraph.
There's so much.
Yes, to let it sink in and to think. I think if you ever see a person reading Khwabnama, you're likely to think that they're quite mad because there's probably a great play of expressions. They're doing strange things. They're
Yeah.
smiling, they're looking angry, they're looking bemused, bewildered.
Yeah.
It's completely overwhelming, as you said. So I had no thoughts of translating it at that point because I was not translating books at all. But once I did, I knew that at some point, unless someone else beat me to it, I was going to do it. It's one of those holy grails that you
Yes.
put away, but you also know that you have to attain a certain maturity before you can even think of starting on translating such a book. So I was in no hurry. I took my time about it. And then at one point, I felt, okay, I mean, it's got to be now or never. I might fail. So let me give it a shot. But if I don't try now, I will never get around to doing it anymore. So that was a few years ago. And I started on it. And then I showed a sample to a publisher who straight away said, yes, we're going to publish this. In any
And
case, its
it's also
reputation.
very well known. So, uh, you know,
Yeah. Yeah. So then I started on it and then I stopped because somehow I felt I was not in the right mental space. So I stopped. I worked on other books. And then a couple of years ago, I felt in summer that, okay, now's the time. The time is right when the time is right. So I started on it and I finished the first draft in about 4 months. Now the thing is that you have to
quick.
work. Yeah, no, but you have to work quickly on a translation. You see, you can't slow
But it's
down.
not an ordinary translation. I don't know. I mean, I
Any translation, because you're borrowing a voice. It's not your own voice, and it's hard to
aren't
inhabit
you
it.
always? I'm sorry to interrupt. Aren't you always borrowing a voice? Like even
I'm always borrowing a voice, but the harder a voice is, the more you are afraid of losing it. Suddenly it'll desert you at some point. And if you feel rightly or wrongly that you've got it, then you just want to be able to get on with it. And also it's got its own momentum. You can't really, it's like just as you can't stop reading Khwabnama, you can't stop translating Khwabnama. So 4.5 months. And the other thing is that I've always felt after all the books that I've read as a translator, that the quality of the prose of a book is can be tested by how, not easily, but how energetically and with what kind of momentum it can be translated. A bad text is very hard to translate good text is that much easier to translate. So that was another thing that led me through it at a fairly quick clip.
I was actually coming just to that point. There are several loaded sentences which are very typical Bengali or Hindi speak, and I would assume that that's how people talk. Like it seems so. Not today. I mean, maybe our great grandparents talk like
Mhm.
that. There are simple things like a long time ago when leave alone Tamiz's father, even his father had not been born. When even his grandfather, this is how even in Hindi, or it's a very Indian thing, uske baap ke bhi baap ke पैदा होने से पहले, I'm just trying to say it in Hindi, but even in Bengali. So there are
It's a
so,
very oral thing.
yes, and it's that's why I think it has that that essence, that which all epics do, because they come from a traditional
Yeah,
from an oral tradition, or
yeah,
same with all folk tales or myths, and I found that fascinating. Or even the Munshi was not a good man, not a good man, this Munshi. So it has that cadence, it has that rhythm, and it's also how people talk, they repeat, and uh, so how did you capture it? Because it's been captured quite marvelously. Was it a literal translation? Because I can see the feverish pitch with which the author has written, and I believe he has written only one other book.
yeah. That's right. He wrote only two novels, and he was actually fighting cancer while he was finishing this novel, and he just about managed to finish it before he died. He
That is
had to have a
going
leg
beyond
amputated.
me. It's like I got to
Yeah.
finish it because it left me breathless, and
Yes.
so much like,
You can see him racing against time even to
yes,
write
yes,
the novel and finish it.
yes,
Yeah.
putting
So
what
that's what I
happened.
mean by a voice. When somehow you feel that you're inhabiting that voice, then the sentences almost dictate themselves. You're hearing it in one language, and then it's forming in your head in another language, and you're putting it down. It's not you don't deconstruct and reconstruct. Sometimes you do that, but mostly no. Mostly you just hear it being spelt out in the words of the language you're translating into, and you're a scribe. You're putting it down as it's popping up in your head. So if you're struggling with the original text, you can't go there. And if you're struggling with the original text, it's because it's badly written. Maybe the music is wrong. It's not hitting the right notes. There's a lack of something.
So that's one thing I was, part of that was actually one of my questions again, that, like novelists, memoirists, we are also translators of thoughts. And Jerry Pinto also mentioned this, that even when he was writing him and the Big Boom, that it's never what you think it is. We're always translating thoughts. And even J.K. Rowling said she literally was at this cafe and she literally saw Harry Potter in front of her, like a living being. And so we're all translating, whether whatever you want to call it, from the
That's right.
ether, from thoughts, from the collective subconscious, made of everything, influenced by everything we have read, we have lived. So it seems that translating from another language is not too different from what
It's not. It's not.
that I
Yeah.
would do.
You've
Yeah.
got this fully formed entity, and you're just putting down the words that will build that entity that you can see or hear in your head, that will build it in the text.
But you
Walter Benjamin said, I mean, and I don't personally, I'm not in favor of these mystical analysis where Walter Benjamin sort of said that, there is something, the text does not reside only in the words, but in some realm outside of it. And then your job is to go from the text to that realm and then bring it back into another language. I mean, I'm just crudely paraphrasing. But I just think that art of all kind, and of course literature, speaks to some part of your mind that you are not truly fully aware of. Just as when we write,
subconscious, the
yeah, just as when
subconscious,
we
which is
write, we're tapping into our subconscious and unconscious, right? And
yeah,
that's what we say when we say this story is writing itself. I didn't mean to write it this way.
yeah.
It has a mind of its own. It doesn't have a mind of its own. You have a mind of your own which you are not aware of. So that is dictating to you. So it's the same thing. There is some part of which your cognitive abilities are not able to grasp that aspect, and we know that. I mean that we know
That's the
from
magic.
brain. Yeah.
Otherwise,
So then you start using those words, right? Some people will call it magic, some people will call it supernatural, some people will call it an out of body experience. But it's what your subconscious and unconscious brain is feeding you. And they, unlike your conscious brain, which will clothe everything in the language of perceived reality, of your five senses, your the other parts of your brain is under no such compulsion. So they will throw it up for you in ways that even you will not recognize, and therefore you will think of it as a revelation or mysticism or something. It's
No,
not.
but when you see children, or you have a dog, and they're always surprising you, they live from that state. They are works of art. They just live like that. And I think as we grow, we decide, we name things. This is a table, so we have certain perceptions
Yeah,
associated with that, and whatever else I might see, maybe some steam rising from a cup of tea which
yeah.
made a shape, or that is etheric or supernatural, but it's all very natural. So I think
Exactly. That's precisely my
it's
point. It's all
and
very natural.
when we go back to a literature as old as Bengali, or uh, I think in any of the older cultures, I wonder if this is an impact that the West had, which was very logic oriented. And you're talking to someone who is a huge fan of magical realism. So this is one, and I don't think Salman Rushdie's Midnight Children did that for us. We by default were that, and the West coined
Yeah.
this term. This is realism, this is fantasy, and when you use these to make big political comments, which is what this book does, there's so much. I mean, it is about sharecroppers and the big famine. So then that's magical realism, but it's not, because this is how life exists. So can you tell us a little bit about the
So,
politics of the
so
book?
the base material and the space in which this book operates is very hard, gritty reality, right? It
Yes.
is, as you said, the world of impoverished farmers, mostly sharecroppers who don't own their own land, and they're mounting this movement to claim two-thirds of the crop and only give one-third to the owner or the person who leases the land from its original owner. And they say we deserve two-thirds because we do all the hard work. And so that is one conflict that's going on. Simultaneously, there's the independence of India, so that's a larger conflict. There's the associated partition and the attempt by politicians to deliberately create a Pakistan and an India in order to carve out constituencies for themselves. If you read this, you realize that so much of it has to do not with any kind of religious motivation, but simply that politicians realize that they cannot be the lord of everything, so they might as well create something that they can lord it over. So that's going on, and as usual, while these games are being played, as they say in Bangla, hat ki jano ulu khagra pran jaye. So when the elephants
Answer
are
that for us, please. What
yeah,
you said in
when elephants are playing, the grass gets trampled. So Tamiz and Tamiz's father, Tamiz's Bap, who's so poor that he doesn't even have a name to himself.
Yeah,
He
I was
just
just coming to that. That's another thing,
father.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at one level, you can very rationally say that this constant state of starvation takes your brain into a hallucinatory space,
Yes.
and you are no longer able to inhabit only the hard margin, live within the hard margins of
Yeah.
perceived
Yeah.
reality according to your five senses. On the other hand, you also see in this book that um, the people here live not only on the basis of what they see and what they feel and what they think and what they read, but also their collective memory, and their collective memory which flows from what has happened in history, what has actually happened versus what their impression of it is. And this history has been passed on through songs,
Yeah.
and through mystical and through strange symbols, which are then organized in the book called Khwabnama, which is at the center of this book, the Book of Dreams,
Yes.
which Tamiz's second wife's grandfather uses to interpret people's dreams.
Yes.
Uh,
I love
and
that. And
yeah, exactly.
it has its own dark side also. So
Yeah, so so this respects no boundaries. So you're moving from what we call, with a Western approach, or a Western approach to ontology, what we call the waking world and the dream world. With Tamiz's father, there is no boundary between the two. As you can see in this book, Tamiz's father, when he's sleeping, frequently sleepwalks. He gets up and he goes out and he does all kinds of stuff out there. So where does he stop? Can you say he's awake? No, he's not. Can you say he's asleep? No, he's not. It's one and the same. Whether he's asleep or awake, it's a seamless world, right? And
yeah.
it's the same with his notions of the munshi who's come from history and who lives on top of the tree.
So I was just
So
coming to that. That ghost is as much as real as
yeah,
the father
so it's
himself.
it's it's a it's a lived reality. What we call magic realism is lived
It's not.
reality for the people in this book, right? So for them, they would be very surprised if you told them this is magic. They're like, no, this is
This is
reality.
real, yes. And
What's
that
wrong
is
with
how
that?
all cultures were. That is, I feel this is um where storytelling comes from,
Yeah,
the collective memory. And even if we were in the book, everybody's perception of that is different. Everybody's
yeah,
version of the same story is slightly different, with a bit of their own
that's
masala, whatever, thrown in.
yeah, yeah.
And that's, I don't know, that's more overusing the word magical here, but that's more stunning than anything we can create just from
That's right.
the
Yeah,
realm of what we decide is
yeah.
real, or what we today call contemporary literature.
Yeah, I mean, it's odd because if it's contemporary, we'll call it magical realism. If it's
Yeah,
ancient, we'll call it mythological literature.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so all that's happening in the Greek myths and the Indian myths and the Roman myths and the Scandinavian myths, we call it mythology,
yeah.
but we don't call it magical realism. But actually, they are clearly tapping into some archetypes, some common features of our human perception of the world, for which today we read them with so much profit and pleasure. And this book is one of those,
Yes. Yes, and this book, I always, it's less lucid than a lucid dream. Even a lucid dream makes more sense. And
which you are familiar with,
yeah, this
lucid
is
dreams.
like this is also how I live. And one of the reasons why I'm such a hermit, if you will, is because I don't think people understand that I don't express a lot of contemporary political views or whatever it is, because this is how I have lived always. And it took me a long time to own it, and I think it works very, very well for me once I owned it. But I see children doing that, and that. But this book is, of course, altogether different, because it's told through songs, dreams, spirits. Then there's the politics. So how do you, and you manage to do it in a very sensible way, because, and also there is a nuance of language, right? The Bangla spoken in Bangladesh of a certain era versus, I don't think the Bengali that is spoken in Calcutta would be. I mean, it probably leaps apart. So how does, you're dealing with a dialect within a language, if I'm putting it correctly? I don't know what are the nuances of that
Yeah.
here?
So there are many things there, of course. One of the things is that I'm a bit loath to call anything a dialect
Yeah,
because
I'm sorry, I
that,
don't know the
yeah,
correct.
that implies that there is a standard version which is somehow superior. There may be a standard version which has become standard because of mass usage and because of print.
Also class, right? Also class.
Sorry,
Also class, socioeconomic
also
class,
class,
and
exactly.
that's, yeah,
Exactly. But whoever is speaking a language, when two people are using a language, they're perfectly intelligible to each other,
absolutely.
right? They don't have a problem understanding. So, therefore, there is no point in creating a hierarchy where for the reader, one version appears very clear, the other version appears mangled or pigeon or so on. So, I don't believe in that. For me, a different versions, if you can protect the register and take them into the new language, great. Even if you can't, and quite frankly I feel most people can't, and I certainly can't, then you don't try to make it what it is not. You can always play with vocabulary and sentence length to create a different rhythm of speech, to indicate that the rhythm in which person X speaks is different from the rhythm in which person Y speaks. But there is nothing to say X is the standard version and Y is a variation. Nothing like that. It could just be the other way around as well. Yeah. But technically speaking, of course, because as you said, this language is separated from me, my life in both history and geography. I had to consult a very fat dictionary of regional Bangla, which came in very, very handy. I was fortunate enough to get a copy when I was in Dhaka, and that was a lifeline. It helped me understand the meanings of many, many words in there. But the rest of it, the complexity is not something that a translator actually has to worry about. The translator just has to follow the text very closely. It's Akhtaruzzaman Ilyas who's done all the hard work
Yeah.
in using the same text to talk about so many different things. As a translator, all I have to do is do what he's trying to do with the language. So translation is really a problem or a task of language. It is not a task or problem of literature. I don't really need to know Akhtaruzzaman Ilyas's literary mind or the tradition of writing in Bangla or anything like that. All I have to do is here's a text in a certain language. Now, can I take it into another language so that what I read in the new language is what I read in the old language? So it's very much a translator is very much a reader, okay, a deep reader, a close reader, but nevertheless a reader. So storytellers of yore, what did they do? They would listen to a story and then they would repeat it.
Yeah.
Sometimes, of course, they slip in their own versions of it because they felt it could be better, or they genuinely forgotten
Do you do
what
that?
came up. No, no, I never do that. That's not my place.
That's
Uh,
the journalist, editor in you who wants to just stick to the
no, I
facts.
think that's standard translation policy. Almost no translator in the world worth their salt is actually going to play around with the original text and add anything or take away anything. No.
But do you get tempted sometimes too? Because, when we tell
No,
stories, we would.
no, meaning I get sometimes I get a little annoyed. This could have been done better, but that too is just me. I mean, one person saying this could have been done better. It's not a definitive view. But no, I don't get tempted. No.
But however, once you have submitted the manuscript, maybe the editor would do that.
Well, I've had a situation where an editor, I don't know if they knew it was a translation or not, who came and suggested many changes in the text, such as take this portion here, put it there, add two
Um,
paragraphs here to link all of this up, and so on. It only happened to be a novel by Tagore. So I had to explain to the editor that there are some technical difficulties here. It's not my novel, it's Tagore's novel. Tagore is dead. I can't go to him and suggest these changes.
and what was the editor's response?
They were like, oh, okay, cool then.
All the Sions, call Tagore spirit, do all
Yeah.
that. Anyway, so and what about this book? Because it requires a certain type of editor. I don't know who your editor was for this, but was there anything, because it's not it it's very different from the other translations, and I've
Yeah.
read quite a few of yours. So
Yeah, no, I don't think the editor particularly wanted to uh, sort of do it. You can't structurally, you can't change it. The editor pointed out some things where some lines were looking awkward or some connections didn't seem to be clear. So it was more a quick case of line editing, rather than anything else. And that's
yeah.
all it is with translations anyway. There's not much else you can do. If the translation is really bad to begin with, it's better to abandon it than to try and fix it.
So have you done that? Like, have you begun something and then decided, because like you said, now you're reading and discovering. So have you abandoned translations that you were in the middle of and then been never tried?
No, not yet. But given that, like, it's like I've never missed a plane in my life. So any day I expect to miss one by the law of averages. So I keep thinking that I'll deliberately miss a plane, which is not very important, miss a flight, which does
Mhm.
not matter, so that I don't fall victim to the law of averages. So something like that, maybe I should just pick up a book and abandon it. So say, okay, I've checked that box now, so it won't happen.
Yeah, let us know when that happens. Would you want to read something for our viewers today from
Yeah,
Khwabnama?
sure. Let me read the opening passages, because it's not fair to plunge into this book anywhere in the middle. You will know even
Yeah,
less of what is
I
going on.
reread the opening passages so much, and like I said, I lost my appetite because this woman is just smelling
Yeah, she's
vapors of
sniffing away
the
at everything.
rice, then wanting to throw up because she's so hungry, but holding it down because then she get hungry. Like the pathos of it, and then it's still
Yeah,
funny, and there's no direct pity, and yet you don't know whether to cry or to be amused, and that to
yeah,
me is
yeah.
the
In fact, one
great
of the interesting
book.
things about this book is that the tone is so even that you can't tell when something is of fantastic importance or whether it is just a very small thing that is happening. Yeah,
Yeah, and it's great for these times when just generally the times we live in, everybody's so offended and we are
yeah,
more obsessed with right and wrong than ever before. So when these characters teach us, you cannot judge
yeah.
anybody,
That's right.
more so in these highly divisive times. So
That's
I
right.
think it's very relevant.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I'll read a bit.
Yeah.
The spot where Tamiz's father stood with his feet planted in the mud, craning his neck as high as possible, stretching his nerves taut, and waving his jet black arms to dispel the grey clouds, needs to be noted carefully. A long time ago, when leave alone Tamiz's father, even his father had not been born, when his grandfather Bhagar Maji's birth was still a long way in the future, when Bhagar Maji's grandfather's father, or was it his grandfather, had barely been born, or not, and even if he had, was only crawling about on the newly laid earth in the home built by clearing a part of the forest, On one afternoon during those days, while he was speeding towards the Kartoa river to visit the Mahasthan Killa with several of Majnu Shah's fakirs, Munshi Barkatullah Shah was flung from his horse after being shot dead by Taylor, the commander of British troops. The hole left in his neck by the bullet was never filled. After his death, with a chain around his neck and his body smeared with ash, and holding an iron pan with fish motifs carved on it, he perched on the fig tree on the northern side of the Katlahar lake. Ever since then, he became the sunlight during the day and spread himself all over the lake and reigned over the lake all night from the fig tree. Tamiz's father waved his arms to get rid of the clouds in the sky in the hope of catching a glimpse of Munshi, which was all very well. But 2 or 2.25 years from now, or maybe 2.5, or even 3, after drowning to death in the quicksand in one corner of the bank recently sprung from the receding waters of the lake, where would Tamiz's father surface? Who was going to make room for him? The large jackfruit trees had been cleared out by the fangs of the big flood, and once Sharafat Mondol's son had set up his brick kiln, the remaining trees would also be swallowed by the kiln. What would happen then? Where would Tamiz's father float up? The lake dried up rapidly, the dry land was cultivated, and people built their homes along the perimeter of the land. Would there be room for a large tree anymore? And so it goes. One page down, 550 odd to go.
And it's the same sentence that goes on.
Pretty much in the first paragraph, yeah.
Yeah.
One sentence goes on for a long time.
The even in the middle, on and off, I found that I'll have to reread this a few times. And it's so interesting because uh, both my son Rio and I, we tend to read while we eat. I know it's a terrible habit, but we do. And he always gets ichabod because it's like, oh, it has all nice things to eat. So I can imagine that instead of these vegetables you're giving me. And and I'm like, I can't read this because I have completely lost my appetite. So it's interesting how books take over our
Are you
lives.
saying that this book could then become? I'm going to make a terrible joke, but maybe this book could become a diet tool.
That diet pill.
Yeah,
Yes, yes. I think was that movie Revenant? I was vegan for a few years with Leonardo DiCaprio and the.
I remember. Yeah,
I
I
that's
think
when
that
I
was
learned I couldn't eat meat and I started feeling sick and I think that was a movie that actually turned me vegan for a good
yeah,
6 7 years, and then I trained myself out of it. So I'm sure your book can be that.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'll talk to the publishers about it.
Yeah. Um, there's the other book with it, Chile Kothar Shepai.
Chile Kothar Shepai.
So would you consider translating that, or how do we?
Yes, in fact, just this morning I wrote a mail to Akhtaruzzama Elias's son, asking for his address so that we can send copies of the book to him, and also asking if he would give me permission to translate Chile Kota Shep. I mean, there's a friend of mine who's a writer and a translator who's been talking about translating it for a long time, and I've been chasing him, but eventually he said that he might not find the time to do it.
So once, how does it work? You've translated this into English, and then I know a lot of your translations go abroad, and then they're translated into other languages. And I'm just thinking of Aristotle
Sometimes,
saying how art is a mirror, and it gets watered
yeah,
down more and more.
yeah.
And at that point, you don't even know how is that process? Is that to me super surreal? There's already we are
Yeah,
translating.
well, I have nothing to do with it. I mean, that's handled by the publishers and their salespeople and rights people and so on. So sometimes when an English translation published in India gets translated, say in the US or the UK, sometimes they'll come back with some additional edit requirements. I mean, line edits, like if you take a book to America, they will want all the biscuits changed to cookies and so on.
Is
Although
it
not anymore.
No,
Although
but
not
like, if
anymore.
you're translating into, I'm sure Khwabnama will go places as it really must. But like, say, if it is translated it into Swedish, and I can definitely say, living in America, I don't think they're very open to non-American things. 14 years I've seen.
Not anymore, to be
But
honest.
uh,
The small presses, the
small
translation,
presses, yes, always.
yeah, the translation presses are they don't have those
Yeah,
strange walls.
yeah.
Not at all.
But the big publishers with their certain marketing dynamics. But however, Europe has always tended to be more open. So
That's right.
if this gets translated, I don't know, into Finnish or Swedish, uh, how would how do you think the process would be? Because I have never asked you this question for any other book. of yours, and in any other book that you've translated, but specifically for this because it's already so, I don't know, in the vapors, if you will.
I don't know. I mean, of course, it would be ideal if they could translate directly from the Bangla, if that is possible. But I don't know how many people there are in the world who know Swedish and Bangla well enough to be able to translate from one into the other. So very often it goes via. I mean, we have that problem in India as well. How many people are there who know Bangla and Tamil well enough to be able to translate between them? So
Yes.
increasingly, we are going through English, which works as a sort of bridge translation.
I think more.
Yeah, which works as a sort of bridge translation. Sorry.
That's okay. Let me come and say hello.
Yeah.
Okay. And is there anything else you'd like to tell us about the book, or we'll get into the questions?
No, nothing in particular. I mean, it's a book that I think it came out in the late mid to late 90s, so which means that we are already 25 years and beyond its
Yeah.
original publication, and it still reads like. I mean, it is certainly the best novel I've translated
Yes.
so
Yes.
far, beyond a doubt.
Can you tell us a little bit about just, I want to touch a little bit more about the socio-economic, political context of it and how it ties in to stuff that's happening today in India, in Bangladesh.
You mean for this novel?
Yes.
Well, it's set in, as I said, it's set at the time of partition in
Yes.
the 1940s. So you're still talking about an India that has just been split, that is about to be split, and then the novel actually covers the time when the partition takes place. And we're talking about a time of great poverty and deprivation for the masses. Even in the big cities, people were not particular. Have I got your question right? Am I misinterpreting it?
No, I mean, I hope I don't know if you're getting to it. I'm just asking about what you said and then how it ties up to, I don't know, maybe the farmers'
Now,
situation now.
I don't believe that
Problems
literature
that
necessarily. Yeah, I don't think that literature or art, any art for that matter, necessarily has to talk to the present times through what is happening around you. It's just that there are some truths that transcend time. They
yes,
take you into a space which is not rooted to a particular history or geography, but a product of it, but nevertheless, which is, for the lack of a better word, universal. So you can go and live in that world. You don't necessarily have to say, oh, this situation is like this situation, and these people are like these people who are right now around me. It's not that. But Nadeem Aslam, the writer who once said this, and I really believe it's the finest description there can be of great literature or great art. He said great literature is that which takes you to a completely new place, and when you get there you realize you've lived there all your life.
that's beautifully put. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So through the unfamiliar, you arrive at a place that is familiar, but not in terms of the contours of the world
Mhm.
around you in your current space time,
Mhm.
but in a different kind of way. It is where you find yourself at home. So I think this book is one of those and great books that work in that kind of mythological way. Are just that they make you feel
Yeah.
that this is my world, even though none of the individual elements of that world may be recognizable.
But we are all human, and I guess that's timeless. What the essence of what makes us, the issues.
We are all human, so there must, and that's the thing, that continuity, because you can see here too that so much of what is happening in this book, their experiences and everything, are they actually come from their own history.
Yeah. So, what else are you translating next? I know you touched upon it briefly in the beginning. What's your next
Well,
work?
right now, if you're asking about the book I'm in the middle of right now, it's a historical novel. It's called, the title is Narach. Narach is named for a weapon referred to in the Mahabharata about the Kurukshetra war, which could be wielded to decimate a large number of people at the same time, and it was wielded by Bhishma to kill a number of Pandavas, of people fighting for the Pandavas. So this is a novel set in the last decades of the 19th century, and against the backdrop of Indians being taken as indentured laborers to foreign countries to work there as coolies, as farmhands. Against that backdrop, it is an intersectional narrative between. It's a novel of exploitation, basically. It's a novel of exploitation by the upper castes of the lower caste, by men of women, by the rich of poor. But it is not. It is exploitation as seen in specific individual instances. It is not. It's a vast panorama, but it's like a play or a film in that you are following the lives of a specific number of people. And it also has real life historical characters making long or short appearances.
Nice.
Quite fascinating.
So we look forward to that. Now, when you described Naraj, I don't know, immediately I thought of a nuclear weapon. Just
Yeah.
can keep over a lot together. So let's get into any questions or comments that we might have. Arun G wants to know, what is the status of translations in India now when compared to, say, a decade ago?
It's better than it has ever been in two ways. One, in the sense that the quality of translations that translators are now producing is the best it has ever been in the history of this country, I think. You have a number of very talented translators working from different languages into, unfortunately it's all one way, in the sense that the translations are all moving into English from other languages and not too much in other directions or between Indian languages. But they're of a very high order, and as a result, incredible literatures from the different non-English Indian languages are being discovered by people who don't have those languages to begin with. 10 years ago, the translations you got were mostly from the canon. So only books that were already well known in their respective languages got translated. But now translators are going out to discover, find out new books, and bring them in translation to readers in who read in English. And as a result, translations into English have now become a core element of English literature in India, or writing, English writing in India. So
Yeah.
that is a huge thing.
People like me are so grateful for that, because it seems more novel than most of us living in cities, writing about cities. I don't know, it's
Yeah, exactly.
very.
And in a sense, if you read, let's say, the literatures produced within the last 10 or 15 years in non-English languages, and you can now read them in translation,
Mm.
you find the vast gulf between those books and the books that are written original to begin with in English.
Yeah, yeah, huge.
Yeah,
And as writers, we want to grow, so we read differently, and
exactly.
translations, I think, are the only,
Exactly.
I don't know.
And I think reading these books will also place Indians who write in English, they will discover a new literary tradition
Yes,
for themselves that they can be part of.
yes.
It's been difficult for people writing in English in India, right? What are they part of? Who are their antecedents? Who do they look up to? Who is writers do they point to and say, yeah, I belong to that particular stream?
We're
There
our
hasn't
own little mess. I think it's beautiful.
yeah,
Like,
there hasn't been. I mean, everyone will go back to Salman Rushdie eventually. He's
yeah.
like, if Gandhi was the father of the nation, Salman Rushdie is the father of all Indian writers in English. They all trace their inspiration back to him. But now you can actually say, no, wow. And there are writers like that, like Amitabh Bakshi, for example,
Hmm.
who has a Bengali surname, writes in Hindi, and honestly says that I am a Hindi writer. It just so happens that my language is English, but I consider myself a Hindi writer.
It's interesting. My first book on the actor Nawazuddin Siddiqui, he talked in Urdu and Hindi, and I would record what he's saying. Then I would write, and I would thought of you. I think, I don't know if you remember, but we had this
Yes,
conversation
yes, we
a
did.
few years ago, and I would write it down by hand,
Yeah.
and then I would type, like I would translate what he said by hand, because writing by hand is more meditative. It just forces you to be more
Yeah, yeah.
into the essence of what he's saying, and then I would translate it. I mean, then I would type it out, and just make some sense of it, because he's
Mhm.
not even giving me a book, he's giving me his random thoughts and whatever.
Yes.
He was talking like a grandmother would tell you about stories, and I thought of them. So does that make me a translator? Because I very much felt I was.
You are.
My first
Absolutely.
book was a translation, though I feel all books are, because you're
Yeah.
translating.
Living in India is a constant act of translation.
I love that. That's like a quote to,
It really is. You're forever translating between languages and between forms of expression, right? You're never guaranteed an existence in only one form.
yeah.
Never.
And also, I just wanted to add to that question. So now look at Bangla. There are so many people, and I have friends also who are writers who like me are Bengali, but of course I can't read or write, and but who have grown up with a huge influence of Bangla literature. And I've asked them, have you considered translating, or how would that be different from, say, I know you want to be modest, but please do not get into issues of modesty and immodesty here. But when you've been translating for a whole bunch of years versus a novice who's just beginning, do you think there'd be a difference in the quality of the translation?
Not necessarily, because some of the best translated books I've read in recent times are all by first-time translators. So I don't think being translating your first book necessarily makes you a novice. If you've been a reader and if you've been a writer in some form, it doesn't have to be fiction or it doesn't have to be translation. It could just be email. But everyone's a writer, so it's starting out. In fact, when you're starting out, you even are much bolder. You can take a lot more
Yeah,
risks
yeah,
because you don't know what rules there are or what you
yeah.
might be breaking. So you can actually come up with something much better than a seasoned translator will, quite honestly.
So
And
it's
a seasoned translator also gets into a groove. They work a particular way. A new person will bring a new energy, a new voice into it. So my dream is actually that there will be so many translators that no worthy work in my language, Bangla, will be left untranslated.
and I
And
was just coming to that. Yeah, please continue.
no,
Let me.
and we have the big advantage in that Bangla literature is not produced only in India, but it is also produced in Bangladesh.
Hmm.
And it is produced in two parts of India, actually. It is produced in Bengal, West Bengal, and it is also produced and has been produced, although in small numbers,
Hmm.
on the eastern side of Bangladesh, in Assam, in Tripura,
Yes.
in Meghalaya. In all these states, there are people who write in Bangla, and the Bangla literatures of the states of the Northeast have been neglected, both by
Yeah.
Bangla readers as well as by translators. And in fact, one of the projects I'm working on with a writer is to compile an anthology of Bangla stories from the northeastern
I love
states
that. Wow.
and do it and translate them into English.
Right, and I mean, I have friends who are just writers, editors from the Northeast, who Bengalis who grew up. Their version of how they see the world is so different from anybody in Calcutta, which is,
Exactly.
Calcutta is an urban city, so things are different. There's
Yeah.
already Bengal, and there's Calcutta, and then there's all of the Northeast. So I love that you're doing that, because it's just more and more like readers would just salivate at all this stuff that's coming up.
Yeah. And this, of course, needs, I mean, it needs a number of translators. So
Yeah.
that's crucial.
And also, this is, I know you're a teacher as well, so it seems, I mean, a little bit that I've seen, heard from aspiring writers is that I want to begin with translating a piece of work, which is something I never heard of when we were growing when I was growing up, and a lot of us.
It's every other art form. That's how you learn.
Yeah, but
You learn
this is
music
how they
not by
want to start
composing.
being
Yeah, but
published.
you learn music not by composing. You learn music by playing composed works. You learn
Yeah.
art by copying established works, right?
Yes,
So
yes,
I think learning how to write by translating is fantastic because at least you're not stressing over what to write. You're just
yes,
you're
yes,
challenging how to do it, right?
yeah.
So it makes complete sense.
But the fact that children have this as an ambition, or whatever you want to say, when you're at that beautiful age, you're young, and you have
Yeah.
these ideas of, and to me that is fabulous, because I like I said, nobody while we were unconsciously doing what you said, we didn't consciously. I mean, music, it's always there, somebody will play, Yurumi will play something by somebody, or pianist
Yeah,
will play
exactly.
compositions by Chopin, Bach, Mozart, whatever. But when we're seeing that come into translation and owning it, and wanting to be, hey, I want to be a translator, I don't want to be a novelist. We're already hearing,
Yeah.
memoirist and all of that.
In the UK, they have a fabulous translation in schools program where they
Okay.
go out and sit with kids and kids actually translate. And especially, if you aim to be a multilingual society with a number of different cultures coexisting, then translation is a very useful way of building respect for
Yeah.
other cultures. In India, our education is so goal oriented in terms of which
Mm.
college will it help me get into,
Yeah.
and then when you get into college, it's which company will it help me get a job
It's
with.
endless. Yeah. It's an
So
endless.
yeah, if you tell someone, the first people who will jump down your throat will be parents and say, why will my children learn how to translate? What job, what college will they get into because of it? and then alternatively, what job will they get? What career are you? A career. I mean, there are kids in class 7 and 8 who are being forced to ask, well, what are my career prospects? And I'm like, forget about your career. Just enjoy your life.
Yeah, yeah. This is a
You're
very
in
Indian thing.
already of being in a good school, and
Yeah,
you've got access to good teachers and great books.
yeah. And the same person is asking, does self-publishing work for translation?
I would avoid it simply because you need other people to look at what you've done, a
Mhm.
second and a third and a fourth pair of eyes, simply to ensure that your work is as good as it can be. Self-publishing does not allow that to happen mostly, and then it just becomes a sort of checkbox. Okay, my book is published.
Yeah, I'm a writer.
Who gets to know about it? Is it good enough? It's not very useful.
So, I wanted to just touch upon self-publishing because how we see it here in the US is it has evolved a lot. And
Yeah,
people hire beta readers for
yeah,
sensitivity. They hire editors. I have
yeah,
certainly helped people develop.
yeah.
I would not, like, at least the manuscripts that have come my way that I've taken up as a freelance editor, I would not say they are the greatest, but they are very much at par with a lot of the
Yeah,
publishers
so
out there
you're
because
talking
they're
about
hiring editors. It's not a vanity press.
exactly. You're talking about a self-publishing system that is replicating the model of corporate publishing.
And just deciding that I
Yeah.
will take care of the marketing
The
and
final step will be just me and
yeah,
not a company. That's
yeah.
fine. That's a different thing. But in India, self-publishing is just about send the manuscript off to the printing press or to Kindle self-publishing, and that's it. And then go and post on social media.
Mhm. Okay, another question again from Anji. What is the status of a translator in publication of a book? A translator is voicing the author to a different language. Would you want me to repeat that question? Did you get it?
Yeah, no, yes, that is what a translator does.
Yeah.
And there are lots of, to my mind, meaningless arguments about whether a translator is a co-creator, a co-author, whether
Mhm.
translation is a creative art or not. I think these are labels which actually do not matter, right? Well, the important thing to know is that if we marvel at, we meaning we who read in English, we marvel at um, Gabriel Garcia Marquez's
Yeah.
amazing novels, but we are actually reading words written by either Gregory Rabassa or Edith. Uh, what's her surname now? I'm getting old, but you know what I mean. Yeah. So we are reading their words. So I think that's fine, and that's all there is to it.
Can you please give more insight?
I'm sorry,
Sorry.
Edith Crossman.
Okay. Okay. Can you please give more insights into a good or a bad text?
Well, I just told you as a translator, my simplest test is does it get
What
translated well or not? Or does it flow as you're translating it or not? But things like good and bad text, there are many tests. I mean, there's an immediate test where some critics will tell you, then there's the test of time, and then there's the test of canonization. Does it go into the canon or not? But I don't think that's a very important question. What matters is, did you like the book? If you like the book, that's all there is to it.
How is it different when you translate poetry? Is there something
It's
different?
different. It's different because there are more things in poetry than in prose that you're trying to protect when you're moving into a new language, right? There's rhythm, there's rhyme, and you may choose ultimately, or you may fail to do all of it. But at least the things that you have, the treasures that you have, are far more when you're shifting them from one safe to another. So it is a different thing. And sometimes, unlike in prose, in poetry, maybe lines will come to you fully formed, or you will have to spend a lot more time with them. You'll have to listen to it a lot more. It's a different sensibility. And you may or may not be able to switch on that sensibility within yourself as a translator. I mean, I know that there are some poets and many poems that I will never be able to translate in my life. So I
Why?
wouldn't even try. I read a poem and I know, okay, I can't do this. I will not be able to do this.
Why? Why? How do you know? Because-
I just know because I can see so many things going on in there that I feel that anything I render it into will disappoint me first of all, because I will not see all those things in the translated version that I'm seeing in the first version in the original language.
Can you
So
give us an example?
I also subscribe to the viewpoint that any translation is better than no translation.
I was
You
just
know,
coming to that.
yeah, I subscribe to that view, but maybe I'm not the person who's going to do it. I mean,
Somebody.
others can do it, and if somehow I feel unequal to the task, I don't think there's any sense in my trying it. And not every book is for every translator. I mean, there are some books which are for other translators.
Right.
I mean, I'll give you one example. I translated this novel Harbat by Nobarun Bhattacharya, and then a few years later, Shunandini Banerjee from Sigal Book, she translated, and her translation is considerably better than mine. There's absolutely no doubt about it. I mean, I read hers and I was like, why did I even do mine?
Mm.
So I'm saying that that book was not for me, clearly, because I brought to it a stiffness which she didn't. So, some books are not meant, not every book is meant for every
So
translator.
does that, so the, like, there is this slightly controversial saying that women authors read women authors, or male writers write a certain way. And does that also come in translation, not just gender, but your own life experiences framing how one would translate a book? And the example you mentioned, for instance, which two books were not, there was not a big gap of time between
Yeah.
the two translations.
Yeah. It's look, I'm open to the possibility. It's possible that a female reader will read a book written by a female differently from the way a male reader will. Does that mean that what the female reader is reading is closer to what the female writer has written? Not necessarily, right? The work has been written. Now, obviously, two readers will read it in two different ways.
Mhm.
And so, inevitably, the gender of the translator may well come into it if the readings are very different. Are they usually? Sometimes? Yes, sometimes. Because, there are increasingly books now that are written by women that will speak to women in a very fundamental way that that men will not be able to appreciate. Yeah, it's not from their own lives. It does not come from their own space of anger and pain. And I mean, for example, one author whose works I've translated extensively is Shongita Bandyopadhyay,
Mm.
and she's an outrageously outspoken writer. And one of the things I've realized from translating her books is that really women don't need men nearly as much as men think.
That's,
Yeah, nowhere near, nowhere near. In fact,
yeah.
if circumstances had been different, women would probably not have had men around at all. Yeah. So I'm saying, how will a man respond to this?
It takes a lot for a man to admit that, because
Yeah,
it's
but so many men might then, if they were to read it, they might read it with a certain degree of resistance. I mean, they will realize it. It's not that they will not realize it, but their
to
response to
face
it,
your shadows. I
yeah,
mean,
their response to it might not be admiration. The response might be anger and or what does she know, whatever. So I would say that gendered reading is possible the closer, and this I think is true of the writing in recent time, more true of the writing in recent times, when I think oppressed groups, not just women but all oppressed groups, have started writing much more with much more anger and much more truth without fear,
yeah, Monoranjan Bapari's
for
is
example. And
quite,
naturally the oppressors are squirming when they
yeah,
read these things.
yeah, and especially in today's times. Um, did we go through this question? What is the status of a translator in the publication of a book? Translator's voicing the author to a different language. I think we've
Yeah.
touched
Well, no, yeah. I mean, it's as we were saying earlier. The translator is not writing their own book; they're
yeah,
taking the author into a different
different.
language. So their fealty has to be to the writer and to the text, more importantly than the writer. Even they they have to owe allegiance to the text.
Right. And are there, again, Arunji's question, I'm curious to know about, is there any bias of a translator that exists, or does the translator just voice the author as it is? And
Ideally, yes, ideally,
but
at
we
least
are human,
consciously. But who knows what's going on inside your head?
especially
But
these highly divisive political times. And
well, those are easier, Ritu, in the sense that if you're a conscientious translator and you see that there's a very specific view that maybe you don't subscribe to, then
mm,
it's your ethics that
mm,
allow you to decide which way it'll go. But the unconscious ones are more dangerous because that's when you're not even aware of the fact that something within you is creeping in and quietly changing things around, and you will swear that no, I have stuck to the text, but hey, somebody else reads it afterwards and says, look what you did. So
And
those are the traps.
And do you think that's when the editor comes in handy? Something like Seagull Books, which specializes in translation, where the editors
Well,
are very
yeah,
familiar with the language, with the milieu
if
of.
you're an editor who has access to the original text, that's ideal. But so it's also got to, that's another aspect of what I was talking about in translating fast, which is that in that period you sort of stop being yourself,
Mhm.
and you just immerse yourself in that text, and you stop being aware of who you are. So then you can keep at bay all your own predilections and your own thoughts and philosophies and ideas.
So that's the same as what we do, which is, whatever novelists, memoirists, I always say it's no different than being a method actor. You're empty and you're just this character. More, I think, more difficult than a method actor, because a method actor is just one character, but
Yeah,
you are the history, geography, politics,
yeah,
and that is the reason why so many writers go insane. Uh,
exactly,
and so,
exactly.
you are the living book. I
Yeah,
mean, at
yeah.
least the
Writers can't have
writing.
very well balanced lives.
Yeah, but
Almost not.
all for the greater good. What else?
And
Yeah,
for their own misery.
for our own. Yeah, it's the only way, to be. So, I think, yeah. There's another question again, Varunji. What precaution needs to be taken when translating a text with collective memory? And I think we've touched upon it again.
Yeah, yeah,
And only a few novels written in the past century can measure up to Elias's last work, Khwabnama, in the subcontinent. This work is a milestone in world literature. That's true. I would put it right up there with the Iliad and the Odyssey. Um, I had one last question, which is coming to you as a teacher of translation to what I call, Gen Z. How is it different? What is it that you teach your students? And already somebody who is coming to a privileged university to study translations, already a whole different uh, I feel privilege plays a huge role in choosing a certain way of life, because when you are in these fields, it is a way of living, it is who you are, it is not just a 9 to 5 job. And then, or the 9 to 5 job may just be a side part, like Anis Salim, whom I respect so much and I love his work, has a different job in advertising, and then
yes.
there's his work, which is who he really is. So what is it, how do you frame young minds? And I don't even know if there were courses in translation, when at least when I
Okay.
was in college. So what do
Yeah,
you
no,
tell
they
the
weren't.
students?
They
What do you
weren't.
learn from them? Just
Yeah.
a little bit
In
on.
terms of work, I have to say I've been extremely lucky in that all the three things I do are all interlinked, and they're linked with books and the world of writing and so on. So very, very fortunate that I managed to get here after many detours. But as far as teaching translation is concerned, here's what I teach. What I try to teach, you might say, is how to love translation, how to love translating. I try to inculcate that love for translating. And secondly, I try to get my students to see what questions they must ask themselves when they're translating. So it's not about accuracy and it's not about grammar and syntax and so on, because these are the things you can teach yourself. But it's about knowing that as a translator, you're always operating with choices. And therefore, how to make a choice knowingly, not even how to make the right choice, because you decide what the right choice is, but be aware of the fact that you have this choice or you have these choices. So
Hmm.
how to choose knowingly and consciously, and in the process how to develop a relationship with a language which you may not think is your own but still is. I don't mean English, but the other one, whichever language you've grown
So
up.
which is your main language? Which is the one
Yeah, I mean the language you heard, it's very difficult to call it the main language. I don't know if
for you,
that's,
which you identify with as a person?
I mean, to be honest, I identify as much with English as with Bangla. I won't put one ahead of the other. And I think for most people, it's like that, really, because you live part of your life in one language and part of your life in another, and then sometimes
Mother
a part
tongue,
in a
then
third,
mother tongue.
and so on. Yeah. So I'm not talking about a hierarchy, but I'm just saying form a relationship with those other languages as well. And one great way to do that is through their literatures.
Always. And of course, we can't have any conversation these days on translation without mentioning Jhumpa Lahiri, who chose to learn a language altogether. And then, I don't know, to me as a writer, it appears like an existentialist crisis that I'm done with this language and I need something to make my own, because you already are an immigrant, so you're already in a foreign land, and her work in English have been about that, the alienation of diaspora, all that much has been written about. But how does that work when you have chosen a language that is not your own to become your identity as a translator? Like it's
I wouldn't know. I mean, I think that's the subject of a fascinating conversation with Jhumpal ID on how it feels on that aspect of it. But I am,
identity and language, because I
yeah, well,
if you were not born Bengali, would you, and you chose that language because it moved you so much, because it is a very rich.
yeah, I think once you have started working in more than one language, then you no longer yoke your identity to a particular language or a particular culture, right? You then become, it sounds grandiose, but you truly become a citizen of the world because you are able to, or you want to actually be a part of everything good that you
Yeah,
see, no matter where in the world it is. My admiration for Jhumpalahiri is because she strayed out of what was a comfort zone, what was a safe zone, into the unknown,
yeah.
specifically to further herself as a writer. And that is an extraordinary step to take. I don't know of any other writer.
Who has done
Uh,
that? Especially when you're so established, there are other, when
yeah,
you're that
yeah,
successful, you have
yeah,
certain
exactly.
commercial things that you have to mention. There's
Yeah, to the extent that she's written her first full length novel in Italian and then translated it herself into English. And
yeah,
then when you read Whereabouts, you also realize that she could have written that novel only in Italian or some other language, not in English.
yeah,
Because it is in English, she would have been writing a different novel altogether, in a different world, set in a different, among different kind of people, with far less of inward, in far, she wouldn't be looking inward quite as much, perhaps, as you would in a foreign place. So,
mm,
in a sense, I think she chose Italian. It could have been French, it could have been German, but I think she chose it specifically in order to be able to form a closer relationship with the language
mm.
without a lot of. I don't know. I'm just guessing. I can't. I shouldn't be presuming on anyone's behalf, least of all hers. But one thing is clear, which is that Whereabouts could not have. She would not have written Whereabouts the way it is in English. I'm very sure about that.
I haven't read it yet, but
You
there is
must.
a lot of similarities between
Oh,
the
oh, oh, you
British
must.
culture and the Italian culture.
You must. I mean, I've always been a fan of Jhumpal Ideas, but this novel is really, it has completely taken me into. I mean, it just shows what a good writer she is, that she can write this along with all those other things that she did.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us? I don't think we have any new
No,
questions.
no, I'm good. Thank you for this conversation. It was
Thank
wonderful
you.
talking to you.
Absolutely lovely, and I learned. Sorry.
Nothing important.
Thank you so much, Arunava, for being here. Thank you, Kalinga Literature Festival, and yeah, have a lovely day.
Thank you. You have a good day, Ritu.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.